Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Addis Dialogue, where we're going to be diving into the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a project that's been making economic waves far beyond its borders. This massive undertaking promises continent-wide benefits, from boosting energy production to driving economic growth across the entire region. And also, it's not just about Ethiopia. This dam serves as a unifying force, bringing together countries in the Nile basin. We're going to be delving into all this. And I'm so honored to be joined by Lawrence Freeman, political and economic analyst for Africa. I'm your host, Shifarao Lago. Do stay with us. Hello, sir. Nice to meet you again. And it's really an honor to see you again, sir.
Glad to be with you.
Yes. So let's dive in and let's first off talk about the key continental benefits of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. As you know, this dam has a lot to offer when it comes to continental benefits. And in this regard, what are some of the key continental benefits of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam for the broader African continent, particularly in terms of energy production and regional development, sir?
Well, one of the most important aspects of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is that at full capacity, it will be able to generate 5,150 megawatts of power. That's when all 13 turbines are operating and have been upgraded to maximum capability. Now, that is itself extremely important because if you look at Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, the greatest threat to life and instability and insecurity is the lack of energy. And this unfortunately has not been understood by any of the Western nations, by the NGOs, by the UN, anyone who says they concern themselves with the development of Africa have been off target, to be polite, because without electricity, there is no life in any economy. We have probably less than 100,000 megawatts of power to all of Sub-Saharan Africa, which is well over 1 billion people. And the largest portion of that energy comes from one country, South Africa. So the fact that we don't have energy means that people, Africans, are dying and suffering every day because energy gives life to industry, to citizens' living conditions, to school, to hospitals, to medicine, to everything. So the very idea that the Ethiopia, who is not considered a, quote, major economic power in the world, is able to, on its own, build and fund this hydroelectric dam, which will be putting in, as I said, over 5,000 megawatts, which would be a very significant contribution to the continent. I mean, it's well over it's going to be bigger than 5% contribution. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, it will make Ethiopia the second largest producer of electricity next to South Africa. So that in itself is extremely important. And in the context of you were asking about Africa as a whole, it gives a lot of optimism, and it should give a lot of optimism to other African nations that they can make sovereign decisions to build and fund and create their own electricity through hydroelectric dams or otherwise. And I think this will be the largest hydroelectric dam in Africa and one of the largest in the world. And there's more dams being planned in the Blue Nile basin. So this, to me, this accomplishment, I've now visited the dam a second time when I was in Ethiopia in May. I might be the only American to visit the Ethiopian Dam twice, which itself shows you a problem. But I think this is a big shot in the arm politically, economically, and also in terms of future policy for other countries to build their own energy sources, because electricity is the lifeblood of an economy, of a nation.
You've come to Ethiopia and you've in person observed the progress the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is going through, which is really appreciable. So in this regard, how does the GERD act as a connecting factor between the downstream countries such as Sudan and Egypt, and of course others in the basin countries, in terms of shared resources and regional cooperation and infrastructural developments? What are some of the things that you've observed in this regard, sir, as an economist and as a political analyst?
Well, if you look at years ago, before the latest turmoil, I was visiting Sudan fairly regularly, and I traveled when I could up the Nile, and sometimes I couldn't travel because there was a drought. Actually, Sudan and Egypt will benefit from the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now, this has not been understood. This has not been publicized, because Egypt, who's been an ally of the United States, has been complaining about the GERD for well over 10 years now. And what's been lost is the fact that their complaints have no merit. If you look at the GERD, which is a hydroelectric dam and has right now no capability or intention of any of the water being used for irrigation in Ethiopia. I mean, that could change over time, but that right now there is no plans for that, and there's no facility for that. The water, they've created several mechanisms at the dam so that they can provide a continuous flow of water from the Blue Nile basin into the White Nile, where the Blue Nile joins the White Nile in outside of Khartoum, and then travels through Sudan all the way through Egypt to the Mediterranean. This actually provides benefits, massive benefits to Sudan, because Sudan now will have controlled water flow, no flooding, will have a huge increase in potential for irrigation. They'll be able to not only increase the irrigation, but increase the number of crops they can grow per year. And according to the engineer at the GERD that I talked with, this will guarantee most likely a stronger flow of water into Egypt. Now, of course, Egypt uses the water not just for electricity at the Aswan Dam, but they use it for their own agriculture, which Ethiopia is not. So both Sudan and Egypt are going to actually benefit from the GERD. All this talk about how the GERD is going to reduce the flow of water, it never happened. During the years of filling the dam up to 74 billion cubic meters of water, there was no decrease in the flow of the Nile. It was all nonsense. The motivation for Egypt actions against the dam and against Ethiopia are entirely geopolitical, but they have nothing to do with the functioning of the GERD. So both Sudan and Egypt, who are two major nations who live alongside the Nile, are going to be better off. And therefore, this helps the entire Blue Nile, White Nile basin of nations. And we should stop these stupid, unscientific attacks and realize that the downstream nations are going to greatly benefit from the control of water, floods, and irrigation improvement.
Let's also talk about some of the potential continental benefits. Of course, you touched upon What are some of the potential continental benefits of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam when it comes to the agricultural practices, particularly regarding irrigation systems and food security?
Well, that's what I just went through. With the fact of the matter is, with the increased and regulated flow of the Nile water, we have the potential to actually increase the agricultural output of Sudan. Now, right now, Sudan is in great difficulty. But one of the things that can happen is that Sudan can be turned into what it once was thought it was going to be, which was a breadbasket for Africa. So this is one of the largest countries in Africa, and one with the most, or a large portion of its land totally unused. This can itself change the agricultural output for Sudan. Now, of course, the other thing is electricity. And this is part of the question of regional integration. But Sudan is already selling electricity to Djibouti, to Sudan, to Kenya. And I believe this year the transmission lines will be completed, and the GERD will provide electricity to Tanzania. So electricity is important for irrigation, because unless you have natural gravity irrigation, you have to pump the water from the water source to the agricultural land area. That requires electricity. So the increase in electricity itself is a factor in increasing irrigation, which is a factor in increasing agricultural export.
That's an important insight, sir. So let's moving on from there, Mr. Freeman. Let's also talk about many people say that this dam can be a model when it comes to the infrastructural development and its architectural design. In this regard, how does the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam serve as a continental model for infrastructure development, especially in the Sub-Saharan Africa? And what lessons can be drawn for other nations, especially when it comes to large-scale projects such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam?
Well, many countries, and many so-called political leaders believe that we can't construct large infrastructure projects. And from my point of view, we have to. When we construct large infrastructure projects, they can be transformational. So the question is not producing a little bit of progress here and a little bit of progress there. You want to change the entire country. You want to change the entire region. You want to change the entire continent. And I have other transcontinental projects that I work on in Africa to accomplish that as well. So look at the dynamics here. The World Bank, the IMF, the NGOs, Europe, the United States said, don't build this project, don't build this project, don't build this project. We're not going to fund you. We're not going to support it. And in fact, they refused to fund it. And in fact, to my knowledge, I've not seen anywhere in the United States government over the last 10 years, any congressional, presidential, or other elected official say anything positive about Ethiopia's accomplishment. Now, that's the key thing here, that Ethiopia, this started on the Meles in 2011. I mean, the history of the project goes back to the 50s and 60s, when the United States sent over a group of engineers, and they studied the Blue Nile Basin for 7 years, between 57 and 64, and then released a report. And they examined all the potential. There's many other potential sites for dams in the Blue Nile, but they settled on 4 that were the most potentially advantageous. And one of them was called the Border Dam. And the Border Dam became the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So this is an American project, which began under Eisenhower and continued under John F. Kennedy. And as a result, the Ethiopians wanted to, in the 1960s, they asked for funding for this dam. And Haile Selassie begged the rest of the world to give money to develop this dam 60 years ago. And they wouldn't. And Haile Selassie said, someday our children will develop this dam. So that started in 2011 on the Meles Anyway and continued under the successive governments through Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. So now what we have is what's now called an emerging nation, is what's now the name given to nations like Ethiopia. This nation, with relatively serious still economic problems of poverty, of inflation, of unemployment, etc., nevertheless had a vision. And this vision, which goes back to Haile Selassie and continued to the present, this vision was to build this dam. Why? To give our people electricity. And if I don't know how many of your viewers have gotten to see this dam, as I said, I saw it in May. It's near completion. I expect it to be inaugurated in September. And it is gorgeous from a standpoint of an engineer. It's a beautiful structure, 1 mile long, 645 meters above sea level in terms of water. This is a great accomplishment for this huge surface area, which will hold 74 billion cubic meters of water. And they built it between two mountains. Now, for me, because I look at things slightly different than most people, this is an affirmation to me that the human mind can intervene on the physical universe to create something new that didn't exist before and that benefits the human race. So you had for 5 million years water coming from Lake Tana over the Blue Falls, which I visited, flowing around, working its way through, and then ending up in Sudan, joining the White Nile. And the Ethiopians said, no, that water is not doing any use. It's a lazy, good-for-nothing water. We want to put it to work. So you put it to work by using its flow to create electricity, the most precious infrastructure project in Africa. We don't have electricity. Now, I'm not saying hydroelectricity is the only way forward. I would advocate massive construction of nuclear power. But the fact of the matter is the Ethiopians conceived of it, persevered over many years, including a war, and nevertheless now have reached accomplishment, which, as I say, should be inaugurated in September. This should show all countries in Africa, this is what can be done. We can examine the universe, we can make interventions, we can fund it ourselves, and we can proceed to make investments that will raise the standard of living of our people, and also, in this case, our neighbors of Ethiopia who are now receiving electricity. So this is a great model for me. It reaffirms what I already knew about the capabilities of the human race, but it also should inspire other African nations, and they should visit the GERD and see what it looks like. It has 13 waterways, 13 turbines, water flowing into them down these waterways at a great speed to move the turbines. And this is a great, exciting scientific accomplishment that will improve the lives of Ethiopians and its neighboring nations.
One of the benefits of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is its connecting factor, especially when it comes to fostering economic integration among the countries in the Nile basin and beyond. So in this regard, to what extent does the GERD represent a connecting factor when it comes to fostering economic integration across the Horn of Africa? Please go ahead, sir.
Well, there's a lot of talk in Africa about economic integration. And of course, we have the African Free Trade Continental Agreement or area. But the way that the nations of Africa will be connected and integrated is through infrastructure. Along with electricity, what's needed is at least 100,000 kilometers of high-speed rail that should be connecting the various cities, capitals, manufacturing centers of the whole continent. And there are plans to build this, to build several rail lines north-south and several east-west. So that rail lines is an essential part of infrastructure for the continent. This is also the case with electricity. There are this particular hydroelectric dam, the GERD, as I said to you earlier, is already carrying out the African Union's policy of regional integration by selling 100 to 200 watts of electricity to 3 nations already, Djibouti, Sudan, and Kenya. And is, as I said, I think before the end of the year, we'll be selling it to Tanzania. And these amounts of electricity, which are in the order of 100 to 200 megawatts, these will also increase, because what happens is the GERD, which is already producing electricity. When I was there, on the particular day I was there, it was producing 1,800 megawatts of power. That power goes to the Ethiopian national grid. And from the national grid, electricity is exported to neighboring nations. So the key factors there is, one is more people in Ethiopia, where roughly half the population does not have access to electricity. So this will increase the availability of electricity to the citizens of Ethiopia and to any manufacturing, all manufacturing, including the manufacturing of what's now called rare earth or critical minerals, requires electricity. So now we have the potential of advancing the living standards of the Ethiopian people and also of the manufacturing sector of Ethiopia, which is the most important sector. But this is also bringing in the potential of the other neighboring countries, including Kenya. And Kenya technically is not part of the Horn of Africa, but it's a major country in East Africa. So Ethiopia has already gone beyond the Horn of Africa. And this potential, and this is what I've discussed many times, is the reason we also want to promote Ethiopians having access to the trade water routes along the coastal areas. Because the development that the Ethiopian economy grows, then the neighboring economies benefit from that trade and that level of commerce, of the physical economy growing in Ethiopia. So I see a potential that Ethiopia, as I wrote in one article, I think, now I would consider it the economic pillar of the East African section of the continent. So we have South Africa, we have Ethiopia. Now, Nigeria should have been the pillar in West Africa, but it's not having, it's having its problems. So Ethiopia is already playing a major role. Now, there are people criticize Ethiopia all the time. You still have low wages, you still have poverty. Yes, these things exist, but are we making progress? Are we making progress in agriculture? Yes. Are we making progress in manufacturing? Yes. Are we making progress in infrastructure, electricity? Yes. So I look for change, improvement. It's very hard to get everything right, but the potential for East Africa and the Horn of Africa to grow, Ethiopia will be the driver of that process. And that's something we should all support and recognize.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time and for this wonderful insight.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you and have this discussion.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of today's segment on the GERD. This project isn't just shaping Ethiopia's future, it is offering continental benefits that could drive economic growth and regional cooperation across Africa. The GERD is truly a connecting factor with the power to transform the Nile basin and inspire new opportunities for the entire continent. Stay tuned as we continue to follow its journey and impact.